I called friends and said, I'm going to do this. And they said, you're out of your mind. As a poor graduate student, you have to find ways to support yourself. So I was a system administrator. My job was to fix machines.
Welcome back, aliens. My name is Naveen Reddy, and today we have one and only Venkat Subramaniam. This is a fan moment for me. So basically, when I go to different conferences, sometimes when my subscribers meet me, they mention this word fan moment. I never realized it. This is the first time. In fact, I'm following you from a long time, 2013 when I started. And I started communicating with you in 2014 itself. I wanted to get some tips how to be a great speaker, because I always wanted to be on stage and talk in front of thousands of people. When I looked at you, the way you talk in front of public, it's amazing. And the way you convey the thoughts, the concepts, it's amazing. So I wanted to do a live session with you because you are in different country, I'm from different country. But then the moment I saw the message on LinkedIn that you are coming to Bangalore, I thought this is a time. I want to take this interview. So first of all, for everyone else, I'm not sure if you are following Java language, but if you are into Java technology, you surely knows Venkat Subramaniam. So let's hear it from you, sir, first.
Well, thanks, Naveen. Really appreciate you having me on this one. It's a great pleasure, and it's great to be able to talk about technology, talk about software development. So thank you for this opportunity.
That's great. In fact, I have a lot of questions. I have actually cut down the questions so that we can finish that in time. The first question for you would be, I want to understand your journey, how you started and how you reached till this place, because that's what I want to follow as well. I want to be a person like you, to be into different conferences, talk about different things. And so I want to understand your journey so that I can at least get some inspiration from it.
So my journey was quite an accident, actually. I never really intended to be in software development. I was working on my PhD, and as a poor graduate student, you have to find ways to support yourself. So I was a system administrator. My job was to fix machines. And obviously, I'm talking about 30 years ago now. And you have to work during the night because during the day, people use the machines.
Yeah.
And so working through the night and trying to do research during the day is incredibly difficult because you need to also have time to sleep and go to classes. So I was desperately trying to get out of being a system administrator, and so I can focus on my dissertation and graduate. And the short answer was, no, I can't really do that because the department wanted system administrators. And then this relatively new language called C++ had just come out a few years earlier, and they were desperately looking for somebody to teach it. And I had no clue what C++ actually was, but I was eager to quit what I was doing. So I said, I'll teach it. And a professor said they will teach it. And then a month before the semester, the professor said, I don't want to teach it. So the department looked at me and said, well, that's yours now. And so it was thrown into the mix. And I called friends and said, I'm going to do this. And they said, you're out of your mind. You don't even know what programming is. You can't really do this. And so I had a month to really become an expert on it. And that's how my journey started. And everything else is history. Spent 14 years.
Sounds crazy. It's C++ in a month.
And spent 14 years teaching C++. I would say wrote several production software using C++ back in time for various engineering companies. And then eventually moved on to other languages, including Java and C# and Ruby and so on. And here we are.
That's great. So when did you started doing the conference thing?
So that again was pretty an accidental journey, and that's kind of the most important thing to think about is it's not that we sit down and plan these things and sit down and say, here's what we want to do. If you ask me what's my 5-year plan, I'll be honest, I don't even know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. So essentially, I'm not a long-term planner. I'm very passionate, but I'm not ambitious in the sense of here's what I want to do in 10 years or 5 years from now. But I'm very passionate. So I started learning about things, and when I get excited, I want to go speak in events to share the knowledge. And back in time, this was about 20 years ago, or maybe 23 years ago. I used to speak at Houston Java user group,
Okay.
and then Houston .NET user group. So, and then they kind of figured, 1 month in a year, you can just give it to Venkat. That's fewer people to look for as a speaker every year. So I would speak, usually in February in Houston Java user group, and then October in .NET user group. And that went on for a few years, and it occasionally, incidentally, I was speaking at the Houston Java user group when a gentleman who runs a popular conference, they had just started a year ago, earlier at that time, came to promote the conference at the user group. Didn't know of me. I haven't written any books at that time. I was a local, speaker, and he sat down and saw me speak, and he came to me and said, "Would you like to come and speak in my conference?" And he had promoted the conference, and he talked about again, you think about 25 years ago. He said the speakers in the conference are Dave Thomas, who had published one of the most famous pragmatic programmers book at that time. Jason Hunter, you may remember the famous Kettle book for the Servlet API, and James Duncan Davidson, the guy who wrote Ant and Tomcat, and Bruce State, who had written books like Bitter Java and Bitter EJB. Those were the speakers at the conference.
That's a big stage.
And then I'm this unknown person, and he said, "Would you like to come and speak in the conference?" I seriously thought he was joking, and I said, "Well, thanks for asking, but." And then I go home that night and I see an email from him saying, "Hey, I want you to just give exactly that talk that you just gave. Can you come and give that talk, in this conference in Houston?" And I was living in Houston at that time, so I went and spoke at the conference. And once that was over, he said, "You want to come and speak in Chicago?" The next thing I know, I speak in Chicago. And the next thing I know, I'm traveling the country and speaking. And then eventually, word gets out. Then I go to the international stage, and one thing leads to another. So pretty incremental.
That's awesome. Because I saw your website, Agile Developers, and then there's a session on talks, and the list of talks you will be doing this year, it's huge. So that's the question I had. Now coming back to your videos titles. So whatever talks you give, I've seen the titles are not normal. It's not like, okay, let's talk about Scala, let's talk about Kotlin. No, it's about, so one of the titles which was "Don't walk away from complexity, run." So how do you choose your titles? Is it you choose it, or the conference people, they give you this talk?
No, so one of the key things about giving talks is almost like you're not effective doing what others want you to do. You need to really find what you are passionate about. And generally speaking, every talk gets written in a flight, in the bathroom. It could be in the middle of giving another talk. So a lot of times your talks are kind of forming in your mind. There's a thread that's running in the background, and a certain particular concept comes to your mind. You're having a meeting with a client, or you're discussing a particular project with a fellow developer, or you're writing a book or an article, and then you come up with a particular nuance about a certain idea or a certain concept. And then you start thinking about it, and then you realize, well, that could be really a good talk. And then it's kind of like you are taking one particular point, and then you are illuminating that. So, for example, "Don't walk away from complexity, run," is essentially, I was working with a team, and they wanted me to convert code from C++ to Scala. And because I had done quite a bit of C++ and I had done Scala, I mistakenly said yes. And when I started working on it is when I really got dragged into complexity. And as I was fighting that particular battle, I thought to myself, well, this is frustrating. And here are anti-patterns, do's and don'ts. And then I realized, wait, but this is not the only time that I'm dealing with complexities like this. There are other projects and other experiences But now there's a thread. What if I can take those experiences and come up with a message and convey that as a keynote or a talk? And then you're like, okay, so it's around complexity, but what should we do? Well, as developers, we get dragged into complexity. But if we can have a sense to avoid it as we develop applications and to continuously refactor, that can help us a great deal, because this is, as a team, as an organization, as a company, and as an individual, this is the suffering we go through every day.
Right.
And then immediately you realize and you want to write a talk. But what's really important about almost everything we do, and I wish I really had learned this earlier on in my life, and a lot of times we don't get the training that will prepare us for what we need to do. But one of the most important things to do is to almost always have a piece of paper. That's a given in terms of how we work. And I'm just looking for my paper that I put in my pocket earlier. I think it's in my front pocket. And you constantly have that pencil and paper with you. And when you get these ideas, a lot of us have these ideas. But unfortunately, we don't really capture those ideas at the moments they arise. 10 minutes later, it's gone.
Right.
And it's very difficult to really get those back. It could be a phrase, it could be an example, it could be an anecdote, it could be an analogy.
Right.
And when those things appear, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's frustrating when you think about it, but immediately you got to start jotting them down. One of the keynotes I'm giving this year is a keynote called, Decision Dials. And so the idea of decision dial is, I was thinking about this about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and sometimes it takes a long time to prepare these things. But one day I was thinking about something and I said, wait, but we tend to think of decisions often as binary, this or that.
Right.
But a lot of times, when you're sitting in a car, you are not turning off volume, you're increasing volume, you're decreasing volume.
Right.
But a lot of times there is an interplay of decisions. And so decisions are not really switches, they really are dials. And the minute that thought comes to my mind, I'm like, oh, wait, but that could be a really nice keynote to present, but a lesson to carry on to challenge our thinking. And immediately you start taking notes. So there's a separate folder where you're grabbing analogies. You're listening to radio, and they're talking about certain event. And you're like, wait, that particular event could be a good analogy to use, but that's gone if you don't take notes of it. So immediately it goes into that file. Here is a reference to this particular story that happened, and here's how you can relate to it. So you literally, not just the title, but the content, you're building into it. And a lot of these content, whether it's a talk or whether it's a keynote, just about anything, Martin Fowler calls this as information set. An info set is literally a core dump of all these different ideas. Not all of them will make into a talk or a keynote, but you want to capture them. And you throw them in, and you just keep collecting them until you feel like there is a substantial amount of details to work with, whether it's a talk or whether it's a keynote. And then you take this information in, and then you ask the question, what is this narrative arc, right? I want to start here and I want to end here, but what's the journey I can take to get there? This comes from experience. When you're a novice, it's incredibly hard to do this. When I gave my first talk, this was literally 30 years ago. When I gave my first talk, this was a conference in Phoenix. And the topic was related to my PhD dissertation. And my professor said, fly over to Phoenix, talk in this conference. The talk was 20 minutes long. And I remember spending countless hours practicing for this talk over and over and over and over. It's the mistake that a novice makes, and which is what I did too. And then when I go and deliver the talk, it was a disaster. And then you look back and learn from it and understand what worked and what didn't work. And then you prepare very differently as an expert compared to a novice.
Right.
And so now I don't prepare giving the talk, I prepare the talk. That's the biggest distinction. So I don't spend any time practicing the talk, but I instead focus on the content. And then once you do, the key is to develop that narrative arc. And when you develop this narrative arc, and it's all about storytelling. But the key is you want to tell a story, not a tale. Because people lose interest when you tell a tale. So you want to come in and you talk about, oh, here is a problem with the complexity. Well, here's an example where that really hurt us. You got about 30 seconds to maybe a minute to give that analogy, and then you want to come back to the essential concept. And then you build these stories to draw this path that you want to take the audience through.
Right. And that's how you engage your audience.
And well, you engage your audience, but it also draws the underpinning for these stories as well. But then one of the biggest distinctions is, and I think this is where it makes a difference. And you mentioned that you saw all these talks on the website, and this is unfortunate, but not a lot of people give one talk in a year, whereas some of us give one talk every day or one talk every week. So some of us have it's a little bit unfair because if I compete, I can never compete with the Olympic athlete because an Olympic athlete is a professional. Right. If I try to say I can either run or do hiking or climbing, they will eat me up and walk away because they do it at a very different level than I would be able to do it. In a similar way, if somebody gives a talk once a year, that's a one shot they have to give the talk. But the problem a lot of times is, I call it the rule of three. And the rule of three is the very first time I give a talk is when I begin to realize what actually works and what doesn't work. And then I would go redo the talk. And about the third time I give a talk is when I lock in that narrative arc. It's getting better over the years, but it never gets perfect. So, and then you start removing content and adding content and reordering them. And it's funny because the act of giving a talk really helps you to reframe the talk so you can deliver it better the next time. So I get to speak in a conference almost every other week. So I have that luxury of refining a talk multiple times. So when you see the talk being given, it's very smooth, but it came out of that preparation, which I may have worked for a year preparing a talk, delivering that a few times, redoing it a few times. And then, of course, the practice, right? You never go deliver a talk without practicing.
True.
And it's almost like everything else. When you see something is really effortless, it usually means there's a lot of effort that's gone into it. And when you see that it's not really delivered smoothly, that usually is a reflection that not much effort has gone. So a lot of these things kind of work together to bring that synergy. But the key is taking that notes. Because you're going to be thinking about these when you're walking the dog, when you're taking a shower, when you're working on a problem, and when something comes to you. This is true not only for giving a talk, but for a blog post, for writing a book. Things that go into a book, go into an info set before they go into a book. And then sift through, and there are things that make it, there are things that don't make it. But writing that down is one of the things I wish they had taught me.
So on that, I have a question now. Do you maintain a digital copy of it, or you still prefer book and paper?
So both. And the digital copy is very important because you lose a paper or it's really hard to search on a paper. But a lot of times, the digital version is not fast enough to capture your thought when it comes to your mind. You could be literally walking on the road and you're like, oh my gosh, I could be writing about this, or I could be, thinking about this way of prototyping, or even investigating solutions to problems. And I go on a hike on mountains a lot.
Oh.
And when I'm up on the mountains is when I get a lot of ideas for books actually.
Okay.
And I want to really scribble it on a piece of paper because it's too slow to be typing that into a device at that time. So I scribble on papers a lot. But then when I come back home, when I'm near my computer, and usually a computer is much easier than a handheld device to keep typing it in. And I would just open up my file and I would just type those in, and those become easy to search.
Yeah.
So later on, when you're preparing for a talk or writing a book, you want to be able to search through these very quickly and find things to bring them to memory.
Right.
So they start on a paper, but they live in an electronic form for the searchability.
Makes sense.